Alright, so welcome back. So I have a Gavko custom Leopard on a table here today, and we're going to be talking about this one. So Michael Gavik runs Gavko, and I honestly haven't handled too much that was custom from him, but the guy's a pretty prolific maker. Chances are you already heard of him if you're here, but he makes a ton of different models and almost all of them are named after sharks. This one's called the Leopard as in the leopard shark, not as in the big cat, but anyways. He does a lot of weird stuff here, and he's one of those makers that has a very distinct style. And there's always something to be said about a maker who is able to have their own style. Like, you can tell a Gavko from a mile away. And the thing is, it very much is a love it or hate it kind of thing when it comes to his stuff. I'm talking about weird grinds, awkward shapes, strange lines, unique finishes, things like that. And this one here is no exception. I'll just open it up for you guys. Yep, that's right. Not what you were expecting, right? It's weird, and I'm going to walk you guys through everything here, and I think you'll be surprised by the end of this, because I sure as hell was. Now this blade here, this is the main reason I wanted to bring this one to the table. It's a chisel grind. Main grind is on this side, it's flat on this side. Now I know a lot of people out there hate chisel grinds, but I never really understood that from a user standpoint. I get the whole cosmetic thing, but in real life, it's really not that different. A lot of people say it makes their cutting crooked, that it's not sharp. I say stop cutting just paper and judging it off of that. Unless all your EDC involves shredding paper, it's not really a real-world test. Some of the finest kitchen knives in the world are actually chisel ground for precision cutting. It also literally cuts sharpening time by half. And one thing that I'll say right here is, even putting all that aside, this knife could not exist in its current state without it being chisel ground. Look at the size of the blade, look at the size of the frame. See how close that edge gets right there in the back? You can kind of see it reflecting off right there. See how close that is? You want to see me cut myself? Well, you're not gonna. And that's because this thing right here, where you can see the edge right up against the side, that's perfectly safe. This is why I think this knife is the best use of a chisel grind that I've ever seen. If this was V-ground, that edge would basically be exposed, and especially with how sharp Gavkos come, it would be a hazard. But because he chisel ground this one, that edge right there, safely tucked away against the front slab. This is brilliant, and this was done on purpose too, because if you look at some of his V-ground Leopards, you'll see that he keeps the edge noticeably farther in on those. On this chisel, he has effectively made use of all the space inside this frame right here, on this slim, flow-through construction knife. And that's something that didn't happen by accident. It shows a level of planning and understanding that I just respect the hell out of. And I think you'll see more of that as we go on. But since we kicked it off here, I guess I'll just keep going on about the blade. It's an odd shape, no question about that. But half the stuff that Mike puts out is divisive, to say the least. I'll just say that right now. He really does have a hate it or love it style. You can say it's ugly all you want, but you can never say his stuff is never useful. No matter how crazy and out of left field his stuff looks, you're guaranteed a useful design, and a screaming sharp edge to go along with it. That's exactly what you get here. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, it looks like a blade that used to have a point. It looks pre-broken. And even took me some time to really warm up to it. But the crazy thing is that after that, I've grown to kind of like that quirk. It makes the thing unique. It gives it a lot of personality that will lose with an otherwise normal drop point. If you're talking about function, then it strengthens the tip. It points the angle of the point downwards and lets you use it a bit more precisely. And I actually really do appreciate that. When you flip to the back right here, you can see the grind in the back is kind of weird as well. It kind of has this branching look to it, like this kind of goes over here, branches out. But again, I don't think this one could exist without the chisel grind right here. Because this grind line that you see down here, it's already starting to kind of blend in with the rest of it. If this was V-ground, this wouldn't be deep enough for it to actually be as visible as it really is. And then when we get down to the edge right here, this one's actually formed by taking material off of this side right here, which is weird on a chisel grind because the grind's over here, so you expect it to be sharpened on this side, but that's not the way he did it. It's formed by taking material off here. So I'm not exactly sure on this one, but I suspect it's for ease of future sharpening. Because when you really look at it, if you were to sharpen it this way right here, put a stone over here, it wouldn't clear the actual thumb stud. but if you put it here, it's well over. So that's what I think he did it for. I'm also not really sure if I can really show it on camera, but this is really a paper thin edge right here. If you like your custom slicey, Gavko is never a bad place to go to get that fix. It's one of the things that he's known for. Blade steel on this one is in Nitro V, and I always say it's a good solid mid-range steel. It's basically AEBL upgraded with nitrogen, so it'll be a good solid performer. Finish on this one here is an acid stonewash, and it's perfect for a knife here. The entire thing has this aged look to it, and it all kind of goes along with that theme right there. The flats have a different texture than the grinds, you can kind of see it right here. Or maybe not. Yeah, sort of. It's a bit rougher over here and it's smooth over here. So again, that just kind of goes with the theme, and it has a bit of like an eggshell kind of texture on it right here. There's no jimping anywhere on the blade, but look at this. Right on the sides right here, he did this along the entire spine right here. See that texturing? It's another one of those Gavko touches. It's done by hand and it takes a ton of work. He did this all along the entire spine and even on this small part by the point right here. He didn't even leave that untouched. And if I close it right here, you can kind of see he did all along the side of the lock face right there. A bit over here as well. Does that really matter? No, but it does matter at the same time. One way you can tell how much a maker cares is by seeing how much respect they give the areas of the knife that don't matter. It's not just out of sight, out of mind here. He went in there. He gave it that extra little bit more. He went the extra mile. It's not functional in the traditional texturing and grippiness sense, but it's still mostly smooth here, but it does add something to the knife as a whole. It makes it feel much more organic. It rounds and softens up the spine and the sides right here. You pick this up and it feels like it's something natural, like it's made of stone or something like that. Like you just picked it off the ground, and I mean that in the best way possible, don't take me wrong, but it doesn't feel like the precisely built metal object that it is. It feels like it's something more, and that extends onto the entire knife. Because when you look at the sides right here, all that texturing, it's along the entire edge of the frame right here. That handwork, it extends onto the pivot as well. All this right here. And it all looks great. Also, beautiful custom pivot right here. And wait for it. Boom. It's on both sides. Chris Reeve, take notes. Because who knew you could do something on the lock side of a frame lock after all? But then, it all goes back to that kind of aged theme here. It all goes back to that theme. He gives everything a bronzed, anodized, tumbled finish right here. All the hardware right here, it's black to kind of blend it into the frame. And this pivot right here is in this blasted bronze kind of thing right here. It slightly sets it apart from the rest. The only thing I wish he didn't overlook was the stop pin right here. As you can kind of see, it's the only real shiny part of the knife, besides maybe the lock face, but it actually needs to be shiny. You can't put anything on that, but it just feels out of place here. It stands out like a sore thumb. It has this shiny finish that literally nothing else on a knife has, and it just doesn't seem like it fits the theme. But for the most part, everything else here follows that theme. Then you just take a step back and look at the overall thing here. Closed, you can see all the lines here are very clean. I just want to highlight this area right here. Perfect centering, by the way. But this one right here, check out where the back line meets the blade right here. It perfectly follows the angle on that tip. And it's not even with the frame. It just looks that way, because if you look at it dead on, it's slightly recessed right here. It goes in just a little bit. It's recessed to the exact place where it just barely avoids being snaggable. It's another one of those things that did not happen by accident. This is absolutely safely maximized blade to handle ratio right here. Top part right here, you can kind of see there's a small gap up here. That needs to be there for a stop pin. I'm not going to ding him on that, but look closer. At the very end right here, you can kind of see this small change in angle right here. If you were to follow that all the way here, it follows exactly with the front curve of the frame here, as if that gap hadn't been there. Even open, all the lines here, they match up perfectly. Like, it all flows from handle to blade and blade to handle. Top here, perfectly even, just kind of goes right along with that. Even down here, everything with the bottom lines up well. There's a big sharpening choil right here. Even that visually does go with the lines. I'm not personally a fan of sharpening choils. They're a place where material ends up sliding off the edge. It bunches up and it gets caught. And even here, it's annoying, and it adds a lot of dead space on a knife that otherwise wouldn't have it. But I get why people like them, but it's just not for me. As an actual sharpening choil, though, it is perfectly executed. It perfectly clears this long, drawn-out plunge grind right here, and allows you to have a nice, even edge all the way to the end. But even visually, it looks like it just follows the frame. And this part right here, if I close it halfway, you can kind of see this part stick up right here. It kind of looks like a flipper, but it's not a flipper. This thing is not a flipper opener. There are flipper Leopards out there, but this one here is just not one of them. It's for close up in contact, but look at this. When you go to disengage the frame lock, the blade comes down and it's stopped by that pseudo flipper tab right there. Without it, the edge would probably hit your thumb first. Also, when you close it, the detent hits the tang right about over here. So actually extremely early. So by the time that pseudo flipper tab actually hits the top of your thumb, it's already well over and onto the blade. And also, if you look over here, despite all of that, he still put the very slightest bit of rounding on the edge of the tang right there that I'm not sure I can show. But that kind of acts like a smallest detent ramp right there. So he didn't overlook that. This thing just kind of bleeds detail. And on kind of an off subject, but flippers on a knife actually double as a safety mechanism. Not too many people kind of think of it that way, but if the frame lock actually fails on a knife, the flipper will pinch you before the blade takes a bite out of you. Stay in the custom game long enough and you won't see some lock failures, believe you me, but I don't know about you, but I would take a bruise over a cut any day. My point in saying all this is that this knife right here, that pseudo flipper would probably do the exact same thing. It's probably not intentional, but I do appreciate it. But yeah, I'm getting off topic, moving on to the action. This one here is the hardest functional non-flipper detent I've handled. And apparently it's another thing that Gavko knives do. This is a flipper knife detent with a flat face detent ball on a non-flipper knife. Sometimes I pick this one up after not handling it for a few days, and I just can't get the damn thing open. And then I get it into my brain. I make that switch in my brain. I think, oh right, this is the Gavko. And then I fire this thing out no problem. With a detent like this, you need to adjust to it. It's not everyone's thing, and too much pressure on the lock bar right here can and will lock the blade closed. It can take some light pressure, but anything over that, you will need to shift your grip a little bit right here to kind of get off of that. Most makers don't do this kind of a detent because most makers can't do it right. What Mike does here is all in that thumb stud. This thing is oversized for a knife, and it's placed very well. It has the ideal amount of texturing on it. You will not slip off this thumb stud. It's completely comfortable to use, and since it's so big, it will not actually tear up the skin on your thumb. Just keep in mind that there is no safe way to roll this blade out. It needs to be fired, and on those bearings, fire it does. This right here is one of the cleanest double-click actions you'll find on any folder. And the fact that it's on a non-flipper right here, that's actually pretty cool. And that's actually the reason he does this kind of detent. This action is phenomenal. Again, it feels like something that was dialed into perfection, but none of this would mean much if the knife didn't actually function. So how is it in hand? Let me just get a few things out of the way first. I do not understand tapered frames. They make it easier for a knife to slip out of your hand. I also hate slim handles. I like handles that fit a human-sized hand. I can't find a grip here on this knife though that doesn't work well. Saber grip right here, your index is locked into this front choil right here. This thing has a generous chamfer on both sides. Not just one side, both. And it's perfectly even with that lock bar. The frame is perfectly even with the lock bar right here. So you don't get any awkward raised portions, no voids or anything like that. And my thumb lands either back here, where this up sweep on the frame right here kind of acts almost like a ramp, or over here on the blade where I get a lot of control. Hammer grip, it feels way too small for this, to be honest, but it's still not uncomfortable. I need to avoid that clip in the back, but it still works well. Pinch grip, that blasted and textured custom pivot right there is actually a functional component of the knife. When you do this, you're basically grabbing it. It gives you a nice, solid, and grippy landing zone on both sides. And even reverse grip on this one, it works well. You can get a good grip on this. So is this the best knife ergonomically? No, but it's probably the best he could have done given the constraints here. And a big part of this has to do with the thickness of it all. It doesn't look like it at first, but this is actually a very decently thick knife right here. You can't really tell normally because he's rounded it, but it just gives that benefit to the ergonomics. If this already slim knife was thin as well, it would be a train wreck in hand. People these days, they keep asking for smaller and slimmer and thinner and lighter knives, but not many of them understand what you lose when you go for that. There's so many compromises that you need to make for basically nothing other than trend chasing, no other reason than trend chasing. A design that was built from the ground up for a certain blade or frame thickness can't just be slimmed down and be as functional. Same thing with size. But you know what? It sells now. I get it. But I just wish more makers these days would grow a spine and stand up for their original designs. And that basically turned into a rant, but let's get back on track here. Thickness on this knife, absolutely necessary. You don't lose anything from it being thick, it still carries very well. It's because of how rounded the whole thing is. The contouring here, there's a lot of it and it makes a difference, in hand and in pocket. Because for as thick of a knife that this is, it basically disappears in pocket. You can forget that you're carrying this. And the only thing that might remind you is actually this huge ramp on the clip right here. Because there were a few times where I was carrying it, my hand brushed up against it, and it sure did remind me it was there. It's not ideal, and I'm still surprised that it's placed so well that it's not a hot spot at all in hand. But I'm still just not a big fan of it. But I guess it is what it is. It is great for getting it in and out of pocket though. Medium tension on this one, and it's just very well shaped throughout. You can kind of see it kind of curves down right here, contacts the frame at one spot, and then goes back up. So it lands right on a smooth part of the frame too, but notice this. The relief cut right here, there's actually a lot of work done on that right there. You can kind of see the lines that I milled into it, and see the edges right there. Over here and over here. You see a wide chamfer on either side? On some knives with sharply angled relief cuts, those can snag onto your pocket. Do I think this one would have been angled enough to snag onto anything here? Doesn't look like it, but it doesn't matter. He knocked them down preemptively, so I will never know now, will I? And about that clip itself, this clip right here is milled, but it works and kind of works more like a hybrid between a milled and a spring clip. It still has that great milled clip look, it matches the knife perfectly, but still, it functions like a spring clip because of how it is right here. And again, he didn't take the easy way out of this one either. Look at all the work he put into this one. Those mill lines right there, his maker's mark right there. And all the rounding he did over here. This is not a lazy clip at all, and the only place I can really ding him is actually right here. On the edges of the clip right here where it contacts the frame. So clips are normally flat on the bottom. So I've seen a lot of people slap like a flat clip on a like rounded frame. And it gets to be something like this, where you have big gaps on either side right here. He did think about it, he didn't exactly do that, and he put in more effort than most. He concaved the bottom of the clip right here, so it kind of sits a bit better against that rounded frame. So he just didn't concave it enough to get rid of the gaps, so it's a mitigated problem, but it's still not perfect. Then we get to construction. There are a few problems right here. First off, it's running on just a single standoff in the back. I normally prefer to see more than one, just for points of location, but for this design right here, with these constraints, I understand it. There's no way he could have fit another. There's no way he could have fit another one in here. And the other thing is, I didn't like how I had to Loctite the pivot. It's a very minor complaint. To me, a pivot that stays in place without having me mess with it, that's kind of a sign of quality. This one loosened up after a few openings, but I will say this, when I took the pivot screw out, the blade in the frame stayed almost like 100% centered, like I'd say 95% centered. And that was with the pivot screw completely off. That right there is a testament to the build quality on this one. But my biggest problem actually has to do with the lockup here. It could use some improvement. I hope you guys can hear this. There's a slight bit of up and down play here. It's minor, but it is there. And that's my biggest complaint about this whole thing. And even then, I don't really think it's all that bad. Because you'd never feel it in use. I only found it because I checked for it. I don't feel unsafe, and I don't feel the need to send it back to be fixed. But the lockup here is by far the biggest problem, and it's not even a functional one. The knife is safe, but I still think there's room for improvement here. So what do I think overall? These hover around the 700 to 1000 range, and if you don't go any crazier than that, you can probably get a base model for somewhere around there. But the thing is, I could see them for going for much more than that. This entire review, I've been saying something along these lines. He does this because of this, and because of that, he also did this. It's all connected here. Nothing here was done for no reason. Each decision has a supporting decision to maximize what was gained from that initial choice. The lockup could be improved, but design-wise, this is incredible. It was when I took the time and sat down to write the notes for this review, that was when I really figured out why I liked this one so much. I had to kind of look it all over at once, as a big connected whole, and put it all into words. This is not something you can see in a photo. You either need to really know your stuff and handle it for yourself, or you need to have someone else there spell it out for you on video. So I picked up this one right here just to try out a Gavko, and what I'm left with is a profound level of respect for Michael Gavko as a maker. What sets this one apart is the above Chris Reeve level of attention to detail on everything. Nothing is left untouched. Everything feels planned for, it feels accounted for, it goes above and beyond in so many different ways. There's layers upon layers upon layers of detail here. And there's a reason behind everything. But while Chris Reeve kind of keeps himself to like this simple aesthetic where everything's clean, Gavko just feels unchained. He goes nuts. You might not like the look, and that's fine. Do your own thing. Think for yourself. But you cannot deny the amount of work and thought that he put into making this one right here. I can look at any part of this knife here and say, oh, that's why he did that. And I'll tell you guys right now, that's unusual. That's more strange than any of his designs. It's uncommon. It's so hard to find makers like this. And I can guarantee you guys right now that his first knives probably didn't feel like this. This feels like a guy who constantly learns and applies what he learns to newer designs. This feels like an iteration of a knife that's been on the market for a dozen years or so, even though it really isn't. And everything is just done so well, with such an eye for detail and with function as his main goal, that this knife right here, I like it despite it having the hallmarks of a design I just don't really care for. And that confused the hell out of me for the longest time. I hate neutral handles. I hate overly slim knives. Tapered frames don't make that much sense to me. The damn thing looks like an alien artifact. The sharpening choil, it's annoying. And I don't like flow-through construction. But I like this knife. A lot. And all that stuff just works here. It proves to me that there is a time and a place for most things. And I'll even go a step farther. I do not think this design could have been done any better, any other way. Everything that he could have done was done, and it was done to the absolute farthest extent that it should have been done. This feels like the best version of itself. It feels ideal. If that lockup was just a slight tad bit better, I would have no problem calling this one perfect. But even as is, just good freaking job, man. You gotta hand it to Mike here. It's not reinventing the wheel. You break all of this down to its components. It's just a frame lock with bearings and thumb studs, but there's also something else here. There's something you can't exactly quantify. Whether it's soul or experience or whatever, it makes the entire thing greater than the sum of its parts. And it sure is a breath of fresh air. That's all I got to say today. I'm losing my voice. Take care.